isn't this?
This is where the motion of the, yep. In fact, one of them, can you tell me which way the turbines are faced? And do it blind. I mean, no knowledge at all of what the turbines are doing. He's, I think, 2,200 feet away from the nearest turbine. And it's one of the homes that recently up in Ontario was just purchased by the wind developer. So, I mean, the stories we hear anecdotally, there is a basis to them. And the basis is in a portion of science and medicine that's been very poorly understood by those people who are beginning to look at it, like Dr. Salt, Dr. Nissenbaum, who found 90% of the people within 3,500 feet were reporting sleep disturbance. That data will all be out by the end of the summer, and it's all been peer reviewed. And it's kind of unfortunate that it isn't here. I've read the papers, I've assisted in some of the studies. So.
Anybody have reactions or any questions? I would like to get everybody in who had their name checked here.
One last thing, can I interrupt?
Sure.
If you want to read public comment on stuff, you know, you just went through whether to keep this regulation at the township level or at the local level or the state level, and there was a very large amount of letters written in, mostly from people from Huron County. Rick sent a letter in, Susan Topp, attorney from Gaylord, sent a letter in, Swinbank sent a letter in, and there's some pretty good explanation. If you haven't read those, you should. Because, I mean, that's what your public comment's going to be when you put this out for public comment.
All right. Okay, Abby Beal had a comment?
Just want to say one thing, is if you're going to put noise guidelines in there and you're going to have decibels, why not allow the township to make it so that their nighttime or daytime levels, background levels, do not exceed what they currently are, and that's what they should be able to regulate.
Background ambient noise, +5 usually is used in that
Yeah.
case. We did have that in graph 6.
But as a recommendation, that way they're
in
not
addition to
working
any
with,
fixed level or even,
not even.
I guess if you include a range, it makes range sort of unimportant.
Right.
If you just look at ambient +5 or whatever.
Right, or not even, you know, let them make that decision.
I guess for the committee, does it make sense to have a range plus ambient +5?
Not if you think in terms that we're talking about existing ambient.
Because the ambient would overrule the other.
The way it is
Whatever
now,
levels
it's
it is.
only if the ambient exceeds the standard that we do +5, because there's, I mean, let's assume you had a community where the ambient was 20 decibels. I don't think it's reasonable to have a standard of 25 decibels.
Yeah, but that's where the people think it's not reasonable to have a turbine built, see?
Exactly.
They want that protected.
Right.
And that is, I mean, this whole issue of what levels higher, background, et cetera. Last summer, Patterson and Jansen published a paper in which they explored what happens when you put wind turbines right alongside of busy highways, where the levels are already high. And they found that people objected to wind turbine sounds as both annoyance and sleep disturbance when they were 20 decibels lower than the highway noise. And at 35 decibels, they started to get complaints, even though the highway noise was in the mid-50s.
I made that study available to the committee
Yeah.
actually last.
I mean, these studies basically say that if you have a quiet ambient environment, and you put wind turbines there, you are going to have litigation and complaints. Why should we set standards that we know are going to cost people money?
Chuck, just to move on with time.
Sure.
Charles.
Well, I think to talk a little bit more about that ambient, you know, you don't want to put things in a range, but that allows communities that are used to more noise to have higher limits. Of those communities that are quiet rural areas where that's going to be an issue. Wind farms are not necessarily right for every community. And our area is primarily retired and second home vacationers that come up because of the quiet rural area. And when you talk about property line versus residence, our economy is based primarily on tourism and the opportunity for people to retire and have second homes. And I guarantee you, if the noise goes across property lines, I have 40 acres, you're going to make my property, part of my property, not buildable, or whether I wanted to give it to my kids or whether I wanted to sell a piece off to somebody who wanted to build a second home. You're gonna make that not possible. So property line is hugely important. Vesta, and there's been several references to what Vesta says. I mean, they're one of the biggest wind turbine manufacturers in the world. And they say in rural areas that you have to, in rural areas that you would use the, I'm gonna get the wording right here, but they want a maximum limit on decibels along with basically relative noise limits of what exists there, okay? Vesta is a responsible manufacturer, but the developers are not listening to the recommendation. GE said for a wind turbine not to be heard, it needs to be a mile away. This is on GE, okay? Now, when you bring it up to the developers, and they say 1,000 feet is fine, that's absurd, it's not fine, and 45 decibels is not fine either. They're pigeonholing us into our houses, not even to our property, to our houses. You know, that's not right, it's not responsible. You know, I look at this committee here, and I see two very responsible or caring individuals who really care about the public, and I see the rest of them that are caring about the industry. So I'm not sure this was even the right form if you're truly going to talk about health and the impact on the community.
Well,
Because I see compromising happening when you shouldn't be compromising on the health safety of the general public. Don't draw the line in the sand. Because, like several people have said, if you draw the line in the sand, whether it's 45 or whether it's 55, you're going to hit, the developer's either going to accept it because it's a win for them, or they're going to totally ignore it. You allow these communities the opportunity to do what's right for their communities. And so you should have a maximum high where we know that there is a problem. And if it says, if who says 40 decibels, you're going to start having impacts on your health, and annoyance, I don't care, you know, everybody wants to play with words. And you don't want to say annoyance is a direct health effect, but you know that annoyance causes sleep deprivation, which will cause health issues. We don't have to connect the dots here. We shouldn't have to do that. We don't have to play with language. We know that that's the case. So 40 decibel does it. That should be your maximum high. You know, if a community wants to go beyond that, they're taking the risk with their citizens.
You always have the option of buying up.
Just in response to your question about, comment about wind and health, the technical committee is called the Technical Work Group on Wind and Health, basically. The mission, as somebody who was here last time from the public mentioned, the mission of the Michigan Public Service Commission is to grow Michigan's economy and enhance the quality of life of its communities by assuring safe and reliable energy, telecommunications, and transportation services at reasonable rates. So those of us who are more into health issues than wind issues, I guess, or energy issues, don't ignore the energy issues, and hopefully the opposite would be true as well, the other members, but we find it very difficult to conduct ourselves in a way that recognize both sides. So we become somewhat antagonistic, if you will, to use a strong term, stronger than I would like to use term. We have different views, and so I don't want to be characterized as anti-wind. I am more pro-health, but I would like renewable sources of energy to be, you know, available as well as anybody.
I don't think there was anybody here.
But we have to watch out for the public interest.
I don't think there was anybody here that I heard speak against renewable energy.
Right.
And that wasn't my intent either. It's got to be cited properly. And that may mean the developer has to get noise easements or neighborly agreements. But if I'm a non-participating owner of property, I shouldn't have to be made to do that, and I shouldn't be affected by the negative consequences of it. They have to start stepping up and doing things, and yeah, it's going to cost the industry a little more money, absolutely. They're going to have to acquire more land to do what they want to do. But again, not all communities are going to be ready for that or want that.
We have a hand up. Two more people who checked their names, and I'd like to get to them. Are you either Tony or Dan?
I'm Dan, and then
Okay.
Tony is here with me. I know he'd like to make some comments as well. My name's Dan Ettinger. I'm an attorney at Warner Norcross in Judd and Grand Rapids. We do represent Duke Energy, which is working on several potential wind energy projects in Michigan, including the Gale Wind Power project up in Benzie and Manistee counties. And I have with me here Tony Agresti, who is a noise expert from New Jersey and has worked on numerous wind projects, including working with Duke Energy. And I do want to allow time for Tony to make some comments because I do sense, listening to the discussion today, that it does sound to my ear to be somewhat tilted in one direction. First, I want to commend the work group for its efforts in fostering the growth of renewable energy here in Michigan. Resources like wind energy, it's important work, and I commend you for it. I did submit some comments to Ms. Baldwin this morning via email. I apologize for not getting to you sooner. And it sounds like they were distributed to the group, so I appreciate that. I want to briefly echo a few things here today for the group, and I want to focus on the noise issue, as that has been the focal point. I understand that this is a difficult issue, and I understand that it clearly listened to the conversation today, and having listened to other conversations in townships across Michigan, that it engenders a lot of strong feelings. I get that, and that people are concerned about these things, and we get that too. But I also recognize that there's a lot of misinformation, myth that's out there about wind farms and their potential effects. And I think I've heard some of that here today too, and I'm hoping that Mr. Agresti can speak to that. We do advocate, speaking for Duke, an approach that's based on good science and facts, and we understand that's what the work group is trying to do as well. But we also advocate a balanced approach that protects public health and welfare, but also allows for, and you were just alluding to this in terms of the charge of this group, allows for clean, renewable energy, sources of energy that the state is trying to encourage. That's a clear mandate from the state. And that also allows, and I think this is being overlooked, although it was mentioned by Mr. Sarver, that also allows and accounts for the rights of the many property owners who are interested in this sort of energy, and who are interested in having turbines on their property, and who can benefit from having turbines on their property. So when we speak of what the community wants, I think that we tend to be speaking in terms of what we personally want, maybe a few of our friends want, and I understand that. I do understand that concern, but that doesn't necessarily speak to the community, because there are multiple aspects to the community, and I think the work group understands that. So I think it's important that we consider these issues, that we consider them in context, that we consider them in the context of the state's priorities, as well as the lack of sound regulation elsewhere, frankly. And I made this point in the letter that I submitted to the committee, but wind is no different than other